The peace of Christ be with you. This is the Midweek Reflection for Third Reformed Church of Grand Rapids on Wednesday, April 15th, 2020, or, whatever day of the week or date you feel like calling it, because they're all blending together. At least that's the sense I get in a lot of conversations lately, that in the early days of social distancing, there was this energy and enthusiasm to say, all right, we can tackle this. We can band together for the common good, and we can settle into new rhythms. We can lay claim of the good things that this great pause affords us. We can lament the things that we're losing. And that lately, some of that initial energy is starting to taper off as we settle into this ambiguous space where the edges are all kind of blurred and we're left wondering how long we're going to be doing this, when we might be able to begin resuming normal activity, and even what normal is going to mean on the other side of this. In some ways, we're shifting into a sort of autopilot with some of this stuff. And I remember one of the first autopilot experiences I had in life. When I was 16, I was super vigilant after getting my driver's license. Everywhere I drove, I was paying attention, hyper attentive to what was going on. And then I remember the first time that I showed up in the Shelby High School parking lot, looked around and thought, how in the world did I get here? I remember turning on the car at home. I just put it into park. I don't really remember what happened in between. And maybe you've had a similar experience with driving or other things in your life that become so routine, so familiar, that you just start doing them without giving much conscious thought at all. And I have some mixed feelings about having any kind of autopilot experience in the midst of this pandemic. In some ways, it's really nice for things to start to feel familiar and predictable. But on the other hand, I hate that this would feel normal. It doesn't seem like anything so disruptive should ever get there. And yet, here we are with some things starting to go into autopilot. And yet, in other areas, I feel like I'm still trying to get my feet on the ground. Like Monday, I showed up at my office the day after Easter and realized I hadn't looked at all at what we might spend our time together thinking about on Sunday mornings. So I was looking at the lectionary, which is a schedule of readings from the Bible that churches around the world make use of. And notice that in this season after Easter, the lectionary slowly works through the letter of 1 Peter. And that's where I ended up landing. So, in the next handful of weeks, the Sunday messages will be working through that book in the New Testament. But right out of the gate in 1 Peter, he addresses his audience and says, "May grace and peace be yours in abundance," which got me thinking about the phrase that I sign most emails and letters with, grace and peace. And how that too can become kind of like autopilot. It's familiar language if you've spent time in the Bible. And if every communication you get from me ends with grace and peace, pretty soon you stop paying attention to that at all. It just kind of becomes background noise. So today for the midweek reflection, I wanted to pause a few minutes and think about those terms, grace and peace, and what I mean when I use those as a way of ending communications with people. So grace is a really central concept in the New Testament. And if I try to define it as simply as I can, it might mean this, that grace means we are excused for not being perfect. We're forgiven for not always getting things right. Theologically, meaning thinking about the things of God, grace means that God's love for us is not contingent on our perfection. And it becomes a foundation for the way that we live our lives, because we don't need to be afraid of rejection for not always getting things right. It's not the way that God's love for us works. It's not something that we earn and lose. It's something that's freely given, fully aware of the fact that we are imperfect beings. I find myself oftentimes, if I'm talking with somebody, especially if it's a conversation where they're really beating themselves up for not getting something right in their lives, I'll often pray afterwards with them saying, God, show us your grace so that we might be gracious with ourselves and with each other. That trusting in that graciousness means that we give ourselves permission to not be perfect, where we excuse the ones that we live with and love most dearly for not always getting things right. Being gracious means that we might even look to business leaders and government officials who are trying to make incredibly difficult decisions that they've never had to face in this way before, and extend to them that kind of graciousness that grants them permission to not get everything right. Peace is another huge concept that runs throughout Scripture and in the New Testament in particular. And if I try to define that one as simply as I can, I might say that peace is the confidence that things will be okay, even when stuff's going on around us that clearly isn't okay. It's a little bit of a paradox, a little bit of tension there. But peace seems to be extended to us as a way of saying, hang in there. Everything in the end will be all right. And if everything's not all right now, you're not to the end yet. But you can trust that somehow, even the challenges in our life, the difficult things that we face, belong. They have a place as part of our story and part of this experience of life that we're all going through together. Everything belongs ultimately. And so peace is our ability, even in the midst of turmoil, to root ourselves in this confidence that everything will be well. Maybe not in the way that we always anticipate, but in a way that we can trust. So when I sign off saying grace and peace, it's not just kind of plucking a phrase out of the New Testament and slapping it on in front of my name. It's a genuine prayer that in whatever you're facing, whatever you're going through, you would know that God's love for you is not contingent on you getting everything perfect. It means that I hope and pray that you will give yourself permission to not be perfect. And it means that I hope that no matter what you face, you have a deep and abiding sense of okayness in the midst of it, trusting that all will be well. And that means that in the midst of this bizarre pandemic experience, I pray those things for you as well. You are not going to win social distancing by doing everything perfectly, by having the most activities for your kids if you've got them at home, by making all of the right decisions at all the right times about what you do and what you don't do. You have permission to not be perfect and to not do this perfectly. You have permission to acknowledge that your energy for tackling all of this is going to ebb and flow. And my prayer in the midst of that is that as you're gracious with yourself, gracious with others, that you would experience a sense of peace, trusting that all will be well. So I want to thank you as always for joining me in these reflections. It's super helpful if you would add your voice to the conversation, and in the comments below this video, share for you. What do you think of when you think of grace and peace? And in particular, what does that mean for you in this season? So again, can't wait till we can meet and have some of these conversations in person. But until then, may grace and peace be yours in abundance.